Hello and welcome to Indus News live from Islamabad. I'm Meher Sher and these are the headlines. Prime Minister Imran Khan has reaffirmed Pakistan's resolve to forge closer ties with Central Asia based on peace, development and connectivity. He was talking to Uzbek Foreign Minister Abdulaziz Kamilov, who called on him in Islamabad. Later, in a meeting with Army Chief General Qamar Javed Bajwa, Kamilov appreciated Pakistan's role in the Afghan peace process. President Hassan Rouhani has slammed the U.S. for anti-Iran sanctions, calling them oppression against Tehran. Speaking at the cabinet meeting, Rouhani urged Washington not to postpone steps to resume implementation of international laws. Rouhani's remarks came after the U.S. imposed new sanctions on Iran, targeting 2 officials of Revolutionary Guards. Armenian Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan says Chief of General Staff Onik Gasparian has been relieved of his duties. The government says the dismissal, announced 2 weeks ago, is now effective, as the president has not signed the decree within the given time frame. Earlier, Pashinyan fired the general over accusations of military coup attempt. The UN Security Council has failed to agree on a statement to condemn the coup in Myanmar. However, the Council has called for restraint by the military and threatened to consider further measures. Meanwhile, the U.S. says it is repulsed by Myanmar Army's continued use of lethal force against its people. In Myanmar, security forces have launched a raid on the compound of striking rail workers. Pakistan has announced closure of schools and other restrictions to curb the increasing number of coronavirus cases. Pakistan is also starting vaccinations of people over 60 years of age against coronavirus from today. The country has registered over 1,700 new cases and 43 deaths overnight, while the tally climbs to 13,300. Globally, the virus has claimed more than 2.6 million lives and infected over 117 million people so far. And in tennis, South Africa's Lloyd Harris has ousted 3-time Grand Slam champion Stan Wawrinka in the opening round of Qatar Open in Doha. The world number 84 beat the Swiss star 7-6, 6-7, 7-5 to set up a second-round match with Hungary's Martin Fucsovics. Well, those were the headlines. More news in detail after a short break. Stay with us. Welcome back. And now for the news in more detail. Prime Minister Imran Khan has reaffirmed Pakistan's resolve to forge closer ties with Central Asia based on peace, development and connectivity. He was talking to Uzbek Foreign Minister Abdulaziz Kamilov, who called on him in Islamabad. The Prime Minister said enhanced trade and regional connectivity between Pakistan and Uzbekistan are vital to economic development. He added that Pakistan is committed to the early completion of the Trans-Afghan Railway project connecting Pakistan, Uzbekistan and Afghanistan. Later, the Foreign Minister held separate meetings with his Pakistani counterpart Shah Mahmood Qureshi and Army Chief General Qamar Javed Bajwa. In a statement, the military's media wing said the visiting dignitary lauded Pakistan's role in the Afghan peace process. The Director General of Inter-Services Intelligence, Lieutenant General Faiz Hamid, was also present during the meeting. And Russia has invited Pakistan to a meeting on the Afghan peace talks being held in Moscow on the 18th of this month. Last month, Russia's presidential envoy for Afghanistan, Zamir Kabulov, visited Pakistan and discussed Moscow's plan to hold this meeting. Russian state media quoted Kabulov as saying that the U.S., China, and the Afghan parties have been also invited. Earlier, Islamabad announced its backing for Moscow's efforts for peace and reconciliation in Afghanistan. The planned meeting coincides with the renewed American push to accelerate the peace process. Earlier this week, U.S. envoy Zalmay Khalilzad met Army Chief General Qamar Javed Bajwa. Both sides stressed the need to accelerate progress towards peace in Afghanistan. And for more on this, we are being joined by Victoria Fontaine, an international political analyst from France. Victoria, Moscow has invited Pakistan, the United States, China, and the Afghan government, as well as the Taliban, for a meeting on the Afghan peace process. How important is this meeting, especially while the U.S.-backed talks are already underway in Doha?
Well, thank you for your invitation. I think it's a really important step towards a regional approach to peace in Afghanistan, as opposed to a bilateral approach between the United States and the Taliban. And this is very much akin to the regional response to the terrorist threat in the Sahel region of Africa. So I think that a similar model is being thought of for the region surrounding Afghanistan, and hopefully the peace talks are going to take a new pace as a result of this regionalization of the response to the situation and the crisis that Afghanistan is going through.
Now, the U.S. has proposed a change of venue of the peace talks from Qatar to Turkey after the Taliban demanded to shift the venue. What could be the reason behind this?
Well, the reason is that the United States has made an internal promise during the recent political campaign to actually withdraw forces from Afghanistan. Now, it's very clear now to the Biden administration that there needs to be a military presence, an international military presence in Afghanistan. So in giving some leverage to other military forces, specifically Turkey, Germany, but also Azerbaijan, the United States is ensuring that it is fulfilling a campaign promise, but at the same time, it is keeping some NATO troops presence on the ground. And of course, Turkey is the perfect legitimate ally to, let's say, represent this NATO presence on the ground in Afghanistan.
Victoria, Pakistan has been warning the world against peace spoilers in the Afghan peace process. Do you think India was not invited due to its objectionable role in the peace process?
Well, I would say that it was not invited because it promises a lot but delivers very little. In that sense, there is no role for India with regards to the peace process in Afghanistan at present. They are not delivering a significant aid towards reconstruction, and at the same time, they are not involved in the security, let's say, elements that could be spoiling the peace process as other regional countries would be. So in that sense, India is redundant to that particular part of the process.
Thank you, Victoria Fontaine, for talking to Indus News. And now moving on, Iranian President Hassan Rouhani has slammed the U.S. for what he called the continuation of anti-Iran sanctions. Speaking at a cabinet session, Rouhani termed Washington's new curbs as oppression against Tehran. Rouhani urged White House not to postpone steps to resume implementation of international laws. He said Iran will immediately return to its commitments as soon as the U.S. lifts curbs. Rouhani's remarks came after the U.S. imposed new sanctions on Iran, targeting 2 interrogators of the Revolutionary Guards Corps. U.S. State Department accused Iranian officers of violating human rights and abusing prisoners. The first sanctions on Iran by President Joe Biden's administration banned the targeted officials from visiting the United States. And for more on this, we are being joined by David M. Hersenhorn, an international political analyst. Sir, thank you so much for your time. Sir, the U.S. has imposed new sanctions on Iran, targeting 2 officials of the Revolutionary Guards Corps. Would these sanctions not further escalate tensions between the 2 countries?
That it is escalating tensions, as you just described, the reaction from President Rouhani. Of course, we have to understand these sanctions and what's happening in the context of the dance that's going on between Washington and Tehran over restarting negotiations about the Iran nuclear deal, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the JCPOA. In fact, we saw over the weekend President Rouhani change his tune somewhat. He had a visit from the Irish Foreign Minister, Simon Coveney. Ireland has been appointed as a facilitator in the JCPOA process, and he said that Iran was ready to resume its commitments under the nuclear deal if, in fact, the U.S. lifted all sanctions. But this, of course, was a change from Iran having recently rejected an idea of coming back to the negotiating table so far. So we have this back and forth, one side escalating, the other side trying to then de-escalate. At some point, we know they're going to have to hold hands and jump together, get back into the water on the discussions going forward, or we'll just have this stalemate for the foreseeable future.
After the recent U.S. attacks on Iranian targets in Syria, Iran's continuing violations of the JCPOA, and then these latest sanctions, is there any chance, in your view, of a revival of the deal?
Well, you know, of course, everybody is hoping, especially here in Brussels, where I'm based for Politico at the EU, that these talks can resume, despite all the extra noise that's going on around this. Now, we know that there's a lot of baggage here. You heard Anthony Blinken, the Secretary of State, recently talking about Robert Levinson, an American CIA operative, believed, who disappeared in Iran 14 years ago, demanding that Tehran come up with an explanation for his whereabouts and what happened to him. Lots of noise on both sides, but the ultimate goal being to get them back to the negotiating table with the EU as a facilitator to try to get everybody back in compliance with the nuclear deal.
Thank you, David M. Hersenhorn, for talking to Indus News. And now moving on, Armenian Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan says Chief of General Staff Oleg Gasparian has been relieved of his duties. Pashinyan fired the general over accusations of coup attempt, but the sacking needed the president's approval. In a statement, the government said the president did not sign the decree within the given time frame. The government said, therefore, the dismissal that was announced 2 weeks ago is now effective. Meanwhile, President Armen Sarkisian has appealed to the Constitutional Court to review the legality of Gasparian's sacking. This came after Army Chief demanded Pashinyan to step down for inappropriately handling Nagorno-Karabakh conflict with Azerbaijan. And the UN Security Council has failed to agree on a statement to condemn the coup in Myanmar. However, the Council has called for restraint by the military and threatened to consider further measures.
Diplomats said talks on the statement would likely continue after China, Russia, India, and Vietnam suggested amendments to a British draft. Meanwhile, the United States says it is repulsed by Myanmar's army's continued use of lethal force against its people. State Department spokesperson Ned Price urged the military to exercise maximum restraint. In Myanmar, security forces have launched a raid on the compound of striking rail workers. The workers are observing a strike as part of the civil disobedience movement against the military rule. Some Myanmar police have fled to India after refusing orders to shoot at the protesters. According to New Delhi, around 100 people from Myanmar, mostly policemen, have crossed over into India so far since the protests began.
Meanwhile, Libya's parliament has voiced confidence in the new interim government formed by Prime Minister Abdulhamid Dbeibeh. The Prime Minister's cabinet was approved by 132 votes to 2 at a session in Sirte. Speaking to the parliament later, Dbeibeh said Libyans have expressed a message of unity through this vote. But the expansive size of the cabinet has drawn criticism in Libya with accusations of corruption and influence peddling. In February, he was selected in a UN-sponsored inter-Libyan dialogue and tasked to form a new government. Under the plan, he has until March 19th to lead the transition up to the polls in December. Now, Nigerian special forces have killed 33 Boko Haram fighters in clashes in the country's northeastern Borno state. Nigerian media said 2 members of the armed forces have also been killed, while 7 others are wounded. It said the army confiscated a significant amount of ammunition. It added forces also cleared an abandoned village where terrorists assembled to plan attacks. Over the past months, insurgents have targeted Nigerian soldiers in multiple ambushes. Boko Haram and its offshoot terrorist organization have killed thousands and displaced millions in northeastern Nigeria. Moving on, Saudi Arabia says Houthi attacks on oil installations in the kingdom are attacks on the global economy. In a meeting chaired by King Salman bin Abdulaziz Al Saud, the Saudi cabinet reviewed defensive measures to protect oil facilities. The cabinet said attacks targeting Ras Tanura port and a residential area in the Haran are blatant violations of international law. It renewed call for the international community to stand against these sanctions directed against civilian objects and vital installations. The Houthis have ramped up attacks against Saudi installations, including the international airport, military, and oil facilities. And Turkey says it has neutralized 25 militants of the Kurdistan Workers' Party in northern Iraq. In an interview, Turkish Defense Minister Hulusi Akar, the militants were targeted in an air operation in the Hakirk and Kandil regions. Hulusi Akar said Ankara continues its struggle against all threats by PKK and ISIS. He said Turkey is determined to save its people from the scourge of terrorism. Ankara holds the fighter group responsible for the deaths of some 40,000 people in a 30-year terror campaign. Moving on, Brazil has reported near record 1,972 deaths from COVID-19 in a day as its fatalities crossed 268,000. Globally, the virus has claimed more than 2.6 million lives and infected over 117 million people so far. More on the pandemic in this report.
The issues related to the coronavirus vaccine, such as inequitable distribution and politicization, are increasing by the day. People's Vaccine Alliance said rich nations are inoculating 1 person every second, while a majority of the poorest nations is yet to give even a single dose. Mexico is turning to China to fill a vaccine shortage a week after the United States ruled out sharing vaccines with the country in the short term. Meanwhile, the United States House of Representatives has cleared President Joe Biden's $1.9 trillion coronavirus relief bill for a final vote. The House voted 219 to 210 along party lines to advance the bill for a final vote. Commenting on changes to his relief program, Biden said the aid has reached smaller businesses, plus women-owned and minority-owned firms.
With this new program, and we're going to continue this, by the way, it's not only, you've been the only businesses with fewer than 20 folks to apply in the last couple of weeks, but now we're going to keep the focus on it because a lot of minority-owned businesses, women-owned businesses are increased significantly by 20 and 15%.
In Europe, drug maker Johnson & Johnson has told the European Union that it is facing supply issues that may complicate the delivery of 55 million vaccine doses to the bloc. Meanwhile, British lawmakers say the United Kingdom's COVID-19 test and trace system has not yet proven its worth. The Parliament's Public Accounts Committee decreed the unimaginable cost of the program, saying there is little evidence of its overall effectiveness. Over in France, the number of COVID-19 patients in ICUs is at the highest level since the end of November.
What is worrying is that the pressure and the limit being reached is mainly on the intensive care unit beds. There's still a bit of leeway, but ICU beds in our region and a few other regions, we are starting to reach the limits of saturation. This disease is still killing around 10,000 people every month in France. So this is a serious disease.
The daily infections in Turkey rose to 2-month highs more than a week after President announced an easing of measures. Palestinian Prime Minister Mohammed Shtayyeh said hospitals are overfull with ICUs operating at 100% capacity with coronavirus patients.
Meanwhile, in Pakistan, the National Command and Operations Center has reimposed COVID-19 restrictions following a surge in infections. Federal Education Minister Shafqat Mahmood says education institutions in 9 cities will be closed for 2 weeks from March 15th. Addressing a press conference, Special Assistant on Health Faisal Sultan said the outdoor wedding and dining policy will continue. Earlier, Planning Minister Asad Umar presided over the NCOC meeting. Meanwhile, the country has begun inoculation of people over 60 years of age. COVID-19 claimed 43 more lives overnight in Pakistan, increasing the death toll to 13,300. The Health Ministry reported 1,786 new cases in the past 24 hours. While in India, farmers say they are ready to continue their protest against 3 agriculture laws till Prime Minister Narendra Modi's government lasts. Speaking to the media, farmer leader Narendra Tikait said the centre cannot crush the stir by any means. He said farmers will vacate the protest sites only after their demands are met completely. Tikait added the protest will not end on the basis of future assurance or partial agreement on demands. Thousands of farmers have camped at New Delhi's border, demanding the centre to repeal contentious laws. Over 250 farmers have died during the agitation since November last year. More stories after a short break. Stay with us. We're back. The U.S. state of Hawaii has declared an emergency proclamation as it struggles with widespread damage from flooding. The move came after a dam overflowed on the island of Maui, forcing evacuations and destroying homes. In a tweet, Hawaii's Governor David Ige said proclamation will free up state funds to assist those impacted by the weather. Poor weather is expected to continue through Friday as flood advisories stayed in place for a second day. Officials say a number of houses have been destroyed or damaged by flash floods. There are no other immediate reports of injuries or casualties. And Russia and China have signed a memorandum of understanding to set up an international lunar research station. Moscow and Beijing will draw up a roadmap to establish the International Scientific Lunar Station and cooperate closely on the project. Russia's space agency Roscosmos said under the deal they will develop a complex of experimental research facilities created on the surface or in the orbit of the moon. China's National Space Administration said the project was open to all interested countries and international partners. Earlier this week, China and France reaffirmed their commitment to working together in the field of space exploration. On to the latest in business. European stocks are trading mixed after Wall Street rose on a rally for major tech companies. International markets are keeping an eye on the passage of the COVID-19 relief bill in the U.S. this week. Basic resources dropped 2% to lead losses as most sectors slid into negative territory. The Pan-European Stock 600 slipped marginally below the flat line, but the FTSE 100 in London rose fractionally. Frankfurt stocks also added slightly. The CAC 40 in Paris advanced less than 0.1%. Earlier, Asian markets also opened mixed, with most major ones in positive territory except for Shanghai and Seoul. And China's consumer price index declined 0.2% year-on-year in February. However, the decline falls short of a 0.3% forecast by economists. According to data from the National Bureau of Statistics, the index dropped by 0.2% in cities and 0.1% in rural areas. Both food prices and non-food prices fell 0.2% year-on-year during the month. Meanwhile, China's producer price index went up 1.7% year-on-year in February, exceeding expectations. The surge is propped up by rising global commodity prices and greater domestic demand. And now it's time to take a look at the latest weather updates from around the world. latest updates, you can follow us on social media at indus.news.